Thank you for tuning in to watch or to listen to this message today. Wherever you are, at home, in your car, on your computer, on your phone, we're just excited that you're spending time with us. We are on a mission here at CRB to lead people to know and love Jesus. And so if you call this place your home, I encourage you to visit our Give page on our website, where you can find a few easy ways to faithfully support God's work here at the church, financially, through online giving. At CRB, we believe that love will save the world, and the best place to do that is in the local church. So if you live in San Diego or if you're visiting the area, we just want to invite you to come join us on a weekend, come hang out with us, and be a part of the family here. Enjoy the message.
You know, a few weeks back, I asked our daughter if she would get our 18-month-old daughter, Rue, to color me a picture from her coloring book, because Rue really isn't worried about staying inside the lines. It's never even occurred to her that there might be something wrong with her work. And so she colored me a picture, and it looks like this. And she was so proud, she was so excited, and she waited for my response. So I said, well, this is horrible. This is so bad. I mean, the colors are all wrong, and you didn't color inside the lines, so take it back, try again, and this time get it right. Okay, you can yank my grandfather credentials now. No, I didn't say that. I said what you would have said. I said, sweetheart, this is beautiful. What a masterpiece. Because you see, we all understand, don't we, that children still color with grace. And when a child colors with grace, well, they understand it's okay to color outside the lines. So I'm curious, where did you and I lose that? Because I remember way back as a teenager, I mean, we heard that message loud and clear, didn't we, in church? That Christianity is all about coloring inside the lines. If you want to be a good Christian, you love God, and you express that love by attending church, reading the Bible, praying, obeying the commandments, being good and doing good to other people. And if you do that, if you color inside those lines, then your life will be picture perfect. Well, I don't know where that message came from, but it's not totally true, because for the last 40 years, I have been trying to color inside those lines, and my life today looks more like my granddaughter's picture than it does a perfect picture. But friends, what if, as followers of Jesus, if it's less about coloring inside the lines? What if, as followers of Jesus, what if it's all about the joy of coloring? Last weekend, Pastor Jared introduced us to an amazing, thought-provoking new series called The Third Way. Now, this is a Jesus perspective. And Jesus is really just trying to help us rediscover the joy of coloring outside the lines with grace and with truth and with love. You remember last week we saw Jesus came into a polarized world, a world of dividing lines, a world of labels that separates people, divides people, vilifies people. Jesus came into a world that was largely composed of binary, dualistic thinkers, people who tend to define people as either good or bad, as either right or wrong, as either liberal or conservative, pro-life or pro-choice, gay or straight, as a Charger fan or a loser. And those are the only two options on that one. Jesus comes into an either-or world, offering us a new possibility, offering us a third way, inviting us to color outside those lines without separating, without dividing, without vilifying, and listen to this, and without sacrificing our personal convictions while drawing a circle that embraces the worth and the value and the humanity and the dignity of persons on both sides of that line, because they're equally loved by God and they're equally created in the image of God. And friends, that's the third way that Jesus says over time will transform lives. You remember the story of the young mom. She's in her kitchen and her 5 children are playing out in the backyard, and suddenly there's silence, which means trouble. So she looks out the window and she sees her 5 kids are all huddled together in a circle and they're pointing at the ground. She runs outside, looks over their shoulders, and there's 5 baby skunks. So she screams, "Run, kids, run!" And they do. They each grab a skunk and run. My invitation to you this morning, be present with your skunk. Recently, a wonderful gal said to me, "Oh, my husband really needed this sermon." And I laughed and said, "Clearly, not as much as you." And not as much as me. What do you say this morning? We stop worrying about our neighbor's skunk. Let's focus on our own, and I believe we'll hear Jesus speak to us today. Let's open our Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, or you can follow along on the big screen. Now, Matthew 5, as you know, begins the greatest, most paradigm-busting sermon ever delivered in the history of the world. It was delivered by Jesus on the side of a mountain, overlooking a turquoise blue Sea of Galilee. And with a gentle sea breeze in his face, he's addressing a huge, diverse audience, as diverse then as this audience is today. And in verse 38 of Matthew 5, he says this: "So you've heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth." How many of you have ever heard that said? How many? Yeah, either from a grumpy old uncle or from a grumpy old preacher. And they both heard it first in the Old Testament. Now, if you haven't been hanging around church for very long, our English Bible is divided into 2 sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The word testament is a Latin word that means covenant. So the Old Covenant is a contract established by God between himself and ancient Israel, and it was a contract based on law. So it said, if you're good, if you obey the commandments, if you color inside the lines, God will love you and he'll bless you. Okay? But in the new covenant, okay, and this is where God becomes a Christian. Okay, I'm kidding. God is Jesus. He's already a Christian. Okay. But in the new covenant, Jesus, God's Son, comes from heaven to earth, and he establishes a new contract between God and all the peoples of the earth. Not just with Israel now, with all the peoples of the earth. And this is a contract based not on law, but on love, on grace, which says, even if you're not good, even if you break the commandments, God still loves you. Okay? Now I want to look first for a moment at the old covenant, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Now, this new legal precedent actually is sourced in Exodus chapter 21. So turn there or check out the big screens. Exodus 21, Genesis, Exodus chapter 21, starting in verse 23. "But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise." This whole chapter is about personal injury, what the law requires if you get personally injured. Okay, birthed from this chapter are all of those personal injury attorney ads you see on TV. If you suffer from mesothelioma because you worked in a building with asbestos, call Cohen and Sons because you're entitled to a huge reward. This was a new legal precedent at this time in history. It was a Roman law called lex tallis, which meant let the punishment fit the crime. Okay, this is brand new. Before this time, the rule was revenge. If you killed my oxen, and because I love my oxen, I would not only kill one of your oxen, but I would kill two more just for good measure. Revenge always escalates violence. So this law was an upgrade. Let the punishment fit the crime. So now if I poked your eye out, the law would require that I pay you an amount of money equivalent to the loss of your eye. And therein lies the rub. It's almost impossible, isn't it, to perfectly fit the punishment to that kind of crime? Which is why all personal injury cases tend to end up in Judge Judy's court. Because they require a ruling. A line has to be drawn, and someone always wins and someone always loses, which is why the law never goes far enough for a God whose character is love. Think about it. Remember when your little sister took a ball-peen hammer and smashed your favorite model car? A car you worked on for 3 months, building and painting and detailing. You remember that? I do. I got so mad, I wanted justice, so I went and took her that first generation collectible Barbie, broke her in half. My dad felt the punishment was excessive, and so he took me to my sister and he forced me to say, I'm sorry, and I love you. And I remember thinking, I'm saying this on the outside, but I ain't feeling it on the inside. And that's why the law never goes far enough for a God whose character is love. Which is why precisely right here, Jesus is inviting us to consider a third way. He's inviting us to consider coloring beyond the line of winning and losing. Okay, so he says in verse 38, you've heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Now verse 39, but now I tell you, now I, the bringer of a new covenant, that's based not on law, based on grace and based on love. Now I say to you, do not resist an evil person. I'm telling you what, every person on the mountainside that day is scratching their head. I mean, this is a huge fly in the ointment. They're like, Jesus, are you saying that love demands that I just lay down? That I just roll over? That I become a doormat, wishy-washy? That I let all my convictions go? Are you saying love requires that I become like some Christian hippie and declare everything is beautiful and let evil just steamroll over me? And the answer is no, absolutely not. I mean, you and I know Jesus resisted, opposed evil with every fiber of his being. So what is he saying here? Well, last weekend, Jared pointed out the key to understanding this verse is the word resist. It's a Greek word, antihistemi. It gives us our word antihistamine. And the word literally means to stop the flow of something bad, like mucus or evil. Okay. What Jesus is saying here is don't stop the flow of evil like you traditionally have in the past. Don't resist evil the way you used to in the past. How was that? Violently. One scholar pointed out this word antihistemi is actually describing a battlefield strategy where back in the day, two powerful opposing armies would march toward each other, then stand toe-to-toe and chop each other to pieces until the last man standing would be declared the winner and everyone else would be declared the losers because they're all dead. And Jesus is saying this is not the most effective way for stopping the flow of evil. Number one, because a whole lot of my people die. And number two, because nothing's really resolved, is it? The line still remains, the hostility still remains, and hearts are still hard. And so Jesus is saying, let me show you a third way, a better way for stopping the flow of evil. Okay, and then he points them to verse 41 and says, here's an example of what I mean. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Now we read that and say, no big deal. But I'm telling you what, in that day, that sucked the air off that mountaintop. Because right here, Jesus is referring to an ancient Roman law that said any country under Roman occupation, like Israel, every Roman legionnaire could go up by law and force an ordinary Jewish citizen to carry their armor for 1 mile. Now, not only would that armor weigh between 80 to 100 pounds, but that Roman legionnaire could force you from anyone, from anywhere, at any time, no matter what you were doing. I mean, you could be walking in a funeral procession of your son. You could be attending the birth of your first child. It could be your wedding day. You could be 90 years old. You could have a bad back. It didn't matter. That Roman soldier could force you to carry his armor for 1 mile, and the Jews hated this law. Jewish historian Josephus said that many times when a Roman army would come to a village, all the villagers would flee. They'd run just so they wouldn't have to render this service. Last weekend, Jared said correctly, there are a few things that unite a divided Israel, like hatred for a common enemy, Rome. And every day, your average Jew, I mean, the arrogance and the pride and the ego and the power of Rome would remind them they were the oppressed, that they were inferior, that they were a victim, and the Roman soldier was superior. He was the oppressor. Now, everyone in the crowd that day thought that because Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, that he felt the same way towards Rome. In fact, some people believe that Jesus had come as the Messiah to overthrow Rome, to incite revolution. So when Jesus says, if a Roman soldier forces you to carry his armor 1 mile, carry it 2 miles, I mean, come on, they're wondering, what is this? How does this stop the flow of evil? Seems to me like we're aiding and abetting our sworn enemy. And it's at this point when Jesus invites them to consider coloring outside the lines. And without separating, without dividing, without vilifying, and without sacrificing their personal convictions, to draw a circle that embraces the worth and the value and the humanity and the dignity of persons on both sides of that line, the Jew and the Roman, because they're equally loved by God and they're equally created in the image of God. Jesus is saying, when you pick up that armor and carry it 1 mile, you're picking up your dignity as a human being, created equal to that Roman in the eyes of God. When you pick up that armor, you're taking back your power of choice. You're taking back your freedom to choose. You're taking back your life. You're reasserting your dignity as a human being, equally loved to that Roman by the Creator of heaven and earth. The rule was Caesar's, but this response is God's. And imagine the soldier's surprise. What? Well, I know how much that armor weighs. I know how inconvenienced you are, and you're carrying my burden for another mile? Don't you see how that forces this soldier to look at this oppressed Jew in a new light? No longer as a victim, but as a human being who's equal in value, in worth, and in dignity. And so the line that separated an angry Jewish person from an oppressive Roman soldier suddenly becomes a circle that embraces the value and the worth and the humanity and the dignity of persons on both sides of that line, because both the Jew and the Roman are equally loved by God and are equally created in the image of God. And Jesus is saying that love is what stops the flow of evil in our world. You know, lately I've been praying for God to bless some different things in my life. Instead of asking him to bless this list of items that I put before him, I've been asking him to bless my perspective. Because I've realized for a long time, I've been trying to get God to see things from my perspective, when all along he's been hoping that I would start to see things from his perspective. Imagine how powerful if we all started asking God to help us see people and help us to see situations the way that he sees them, because God's love is not affected by lines. God's love is not affected by labels. You know, one of my heroes of the faith is St. Francis of Assisi. Look what he said in the 12th century. Some of you won't like this quote. You can show your love to others by not wishing that they should be better Christians. You know, the church was so embarrassed by that quote that for 200 years they pulled the word "not" out of that sentence. And they were saying, you know, as Francis always said, you can show your love to others by wishing that they should be better Christians. What was Francis saying? He was saying the way you truly love someone is not because they're on the same side of the line as you. The way you truly love someone is by seeing their value and their worth, that they're equally loved by God when they don't agree with you and when they hold convictions different from you. When I was 9 years old, I was a mediocre AAU swimmer on the Davenport swim team. And I had another 9-year-old Fred on that team who was also a mediocre swimmer. And every day during the summer at 7 a.m., when all our friends were sleeping in, our parents would drive us down to this freezing cold LeClaire Municipal Swimming Pool for a 2-hour practice. And so with shivering blue lips and chattering teeth, we would commiserate. And in the crucible of that suffering, we became fast friends. We swam together like that for 7 years, and then we went to high school, but we went to rival high schools. Johnny went to Central High and became a Blue Devil. And I went to West High and I became a Falcon. And we both played football. And you know, in these small towns, football is everything. And so on the night of the big game, crosstown rivals, that city was split right down the middle. A couple days before the big game, we had this huge West High party. And all of us as West High football players, we were all there. It was a rally party before the big game. And suddenly, this contingent of Central High football players crashed the party. And I mean, instantly, there was this invisible line drawn across the floor. On that side were the Central High football players. On this side were the West High football players. I mean, it was like that scene in Grease. You had the T-Birds on this side, Scorpions were on that side, and I was Danny Zuko. Because I had hair, a lot of hair then. And Johnny was Leo. Because everybody in the house that night knew that we were fast friends. And all the Central guys were saying, hey, Johnny, you can't hang out with that Kuehl kid. He's the enemy. We're going to crush him on Friday night. And all the West guys were saying, hey, bud, you can't be friends with Johnny. He's the enemy. He's the devil. And we're going to annihilate him on Friday night. And I'm telling you what, as that line became visible, it got real awkward for Johnny and I that night. It got real confusing. There was tension. It was uncomfortable. And you all know exactly what I'm talking about because that scene has played out in your life 1,000 times over. When your son came home from college and said, Mom, I'm gay, suddenly a line appeared. When your daughter came home from high school and said, "Dad, I'm pregnant," suddenly a line appeared. When your husband, your wife said, "I'm having an affair," a line appeared. How about when that coworker, a friend, got that promotion you've been knocking yourself out for? Didn't a line suddenly appear? Or when your best friend betrayed a confidence that broke your heart, suddenly a line appears. Or worst of all, when your son comes home wearing an Oakland Raiders football jersey. Boom. And when that line appeared in that relationship, suddenly things got awkward, didn't they? Got confusing. There was tension. It was uncomfortable. What do you do? And Jesus whispers, a third way. Color outside that line. And without separating, without dividing, without vilifying, and without sacrificing your own convictions, draw a circle that embraces the worth and the value, the humanity and the dignity of persons on both sides of that line who are equally loved by God and equally created in the image of God. Friends, isn't that what Jesus did for us? Jesus came from heaven to earth because he saw a line separating a holy God from an unholy people. Jesus came down because he saw this dividing wall of hostility between a perfect God and an imperfect, sinful me. But he loved me enough to color outside that line, and he drew a circle on that cross that declared my value and my worth as a sinner. And that won my heart. That's what changed my life. And as a result today, aren't we in this circle with this perfect, holy God as his beloved, forgiven, sinful sons and daughters? So, $100,000 question. What did Johnny and I do with that line? Well, we chose to color outside that line, and we drew a circle, and we both married first cousins. Johnny married Vicky Leander, and I married her equally attractive first cousin, Candy Karstens. And so today, Johnny and I, we're in this circle. And let me tell you, we carry some deep differences. Johnny will always be a blue devil, and I will always be a falcon. But we carry those differences, and we carry other differences within a circle that's called family. Imagine what the world would be like if, as followers of Jesus, when we come to a line, when we come to a label, if instead of separating, instead of dividing, instead of vilifying, and without sacrificing our convictions, if we could draw a circle that embraces the value and the worth, the humanity and the dignity of persons on both sides of that line, because we're equally loved by God and we're equally created in the image of God, I think the world would be a better place. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, in a world that loves to draw lines, in a world that loves to assign value and assign labels that separate, I pray that you would help us to be circle makers. In Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen. I invite you to stand. Listen, speaking of drawing circles, Pastor Nate earlier said that this Christmas we're going to draw a huge circle around people who are less fortunate than we are. I want this to be a huge circle. And that's directly related to your generosity and my generosity with the Christmas offering. So let's do that. May God bless us all in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.